So I've called today's talk Stop the Noise for reasons which hopefully will become obvious as things unfold. When we were little, we used to go to my grandparents, and my granddad used to say, "Now children, if you're going to make a noise, could you please do it quietly?" And as it's Father's Day today, I thought some advice for the teenagers. Dad only wants two things: peace and quiet, and probably a hug. Right, now back in the days when we used to listen to music on cassette tapes, do you guys even know what they are? No, yeah, ask your dad. He might remember. Most recordings, especially the ones that we used to make of the top 40 on a Sunday night when we used to record all the hits off the radio, they were every week. They were very noisy because there was a lot of background hiss, which was really quite distracting. But see, tape players had this little switch on them, Dolby noise reduction, and you used to have Dolby B. But if it was really hissy, you had to go the whole lot up to Dolby C, which took all the hiss out. Unfortunately, it also took all the treble out and made the music pretty much unlistenable too. But it was still better to listen to music without any top end at all than it was to listen to the whole time in the background. So we used to put up with it. Now, audio engineers talk about the signal to noise ratio. What's that, John? Well, today I'm recording this talk using this little microphone. The signal in signal to noise is what you want to listen to, i.e. my voice, no chuckling. And the noise is what you don't want to listen to, like people coughing or eating popcorn in the back row. We've got rid of that problem today because we've just got rid of the entire back row. But to comfortably listen to a recording, the signal has to be 100 times louder than the noise. Now, this mic only picks up sound from a few inches away from it, so hopefully no popcorn crunching gets recorded. And we have a good signal to noise ratio. And it's also recording digitally, so we don't get that old cassette tape hiss. Some things were not better in the good old days. Now, very interesting, John, you might say, or indeed, you probably wouldn't. But either way, what's that got to do with God, church, or the Bible? Well, bear with. If you were here last month, you would have remembered, no doubt, Sarah quoting from 1 Kings 19, where the prophet Elijah has this encounter with God in the wilderness up Mount Sinai. And there's this massive wind that comes and splits the rocks, and Elijah takes shelter in a cave to get away from it, and God said he isn't in the wind. And then there's an earthquake, and then there's a fire, but God isn't in those either. And then things calm down, and there's this gentle whisper, and Elijah comes to the mouth of the cave to try and hear the whisper. And the whisper is the voice of God that tells Elijah what to do next. Now, I've known a few people over the years who have actually heard the audible voice of God like Elijah, but even they would say that it's a pretty rare event, usually a one-off. More normally, when we listen, we expect to receive some kind of mental impression, maybe a picture or a little movie in our heads, maybe a vivid dream in our sleep, or a Bible verse. There are all sorts of ways that God communicates us through the Holy Spirit that lives inside the believer. But they're not normally the noisy earth, wind and fire type of events. They're much more the gentle whisper or the still small voice, as many translations have it, that we need to tune into carefully. So, coming back to our signal to noise ratio, now you're all acquainted with psychoacoustics. If the signal is God's voice and it's a gentle whisper, then the noise is going to have to be really, really quiet to hear the signal clearly. Like 1% of a whisper is basically silence. And so the question becomes, how much silence do I have in my life? And this is where we hit a massive cultural issue. The average person in the UK has a noisy life. What do I mean by that? Our culture is increasingly 24/7 in nature. So a generation ago, we had a day a week where basically nothing happened. Life slowed down, and even on a normal day, you couldn't go shopping after 5:30. There were 3 channels on the telly, And if you wanted to see the news, you had to wait for its slot, which was BBC One, 6 o'clock. If you wanted to contact a friend, you had to wait until you were both likely to be in so that you could ring them on the landline. That's if you were allowed to use the phone, which I wasn't because my dad said it was very expensive. Contrast that with today, where Sunday is a major day for retail and leisure. There are hundreds of channels on the TV, but less than half of 16 to 24-year-olds even watch live TV at all, preferring catch-up services, YouTube and TikTok, whatever that is. News organisations work around the clock to deliver constant updates, and we can be contacted by phone, text, video calls, messaging apps and updates on social media, any time of the day or night for a few pounds a month. And even worse, the means to do all of the above is this little slab of plastic and glass sitting in your pocket. So it's always available, unless your parents are sensible enough to put limitations on your usage. Now, my mum is 86 and she doesn't have the internet, so there are absolutely no limitations on how much I can use this device, except my own self-discipline. Oh dear. But the apps that inhabit my phone and my smart TV have been designed to overcome self-discipline. They are deliberately addictive and designed to maximise the time that I spend using them, and therefore, of course, the number of adverts that I see. Now, when I finish watching an episode of something highly educational, like Clarkson's Farm, for instance, on a streaming service, what happens when I get to the end? I have about 5 seconds to abort, or it plays the next one straight away. And when I get to the end of the series, it just plays something else that it thinks I like instead. How easy is it to watch TV way past your bedtime? Back in the day, you knew it was bedtime because the last programme finished at 11 p.m. and then they played the national anthem, so you had to stand up. And then after that, and you're not going to believe this, the TV used to play a high-pitched sound in case you'd fallen asleep. So it would wake you up so that you could go to bed. And social media is even worse because there's no natural end of an episode. There's no point where you might say, oh, enough, it's time to do something more productive, or it's time to go to bed. Infinite scroll means that the stream of information will just keep on coming until your thumb cramps up or drops off. The idea of infinite scroll was stolen, actually, and repurposed from web browsing, where it was invented to smoothly deliver long web pages. Its inventor has said, I feel guilty for it. I think that we in the tech industry have created the tools to addict people. Now, I read recently the average teenager now spends almost 2 hours a day on Snapchat and TikTok alone, and that's before they get on YouTube and all the rest of them. 2 hours a day. Whatever our preference, be it funny videos, sport, news, games, we've become so used to their instant availability that whenever we've got a pause in life, like standing in a queue or just waiting for the kettle to boil, our hand has grabbed our phone and we're into an app before we seem to have actually made any conscious decision to do so. Every silence can be conveniently filled with literally endless entertainment. Or maybe you're old school and you just have the TV or the radio on in the background throughout the day for a bit of company, because silence can accentuate the feeling of being alone, and we have to listen to our own thoughts and feelings rather than processing the noise around us. Interestingly, when I asked my artificially intelligent AI friend, ChatGPT, about infinite scroll, it summed it up like this. Infinite scroll, I should do this in a robot voice, shouldn't I? Infinite scroll can represent 1, endless distraction, a never-ending feed of noise pulling you away from real presence or reflection. 2, information overload, the sense that there's always more to know, see, or worry about. And 3, avoidance of silence, of yourself of the, get this, still small voice. Even AI knows that the constant noise makes it impossible to hear God. It concludes, it's like wandering a hallway with no end. One more swipe, one more hit of novelty, while the deeper truths, the things that matter, quietly wait. That wouldn't be a bad description of 21st century life in the West, even if a human had written it. It even offered to design me a digital Sabbath to get me away from my tech. I mean, how surreal is that? Artificial intelligence giving me advice on how to have a real life. I mean, we have truly entered the twilight zone. So what is the antidote for our noisy lives? How are we ever going to hear God, or indeed our own inner selves? As T.S. Eliot wrote, "Where shall the world be found? Where will the word resound? Not here, there is not enough silence." All the greats of contemplative Christianity down the centuries agree with T.S. Eliot. And I've recommended two practices, spiritual disciplines, if you like, as essential to the Christian life: silence and solitude. And they go together like hand in glove. Henri Nouwen, the theologian and psychologist who taught at Harvard and Yale, wrote, "Without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and listen to him." I'm going to read that again, just let it sink in. Without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and listen to him. Now, we can validate the importance of these two intertwined practices by looking at the accounts of Jesus' life, which should always be our starting point. And before Jesus even starts his ministry, he spends 40 days alone in the wilderness in Matthew 4. Now, we tend to think of this as when he was tempted by Satan, but there's only like 3 temptations that are actually mentioned, and it says that when Jesus had finished being tempted, then the devil went away. So I think the vast majority of this almost 6 weeks that he was completely on his own in the wilderness was probably just spent by Jesus, just tuning in to that still small voice of his Father. In Luke 6, we see Jesus praying all night on a mountain before choosing his 12 disciples. In Matthew 14, when Jesus hears about the death of John the Baptist, he heads for a remote place to be alone. The crowds follow him, and after miraculously healing them and doing the feeding of the 5,000, he sends them home and heads up into the hills again, alone to pray. In Mark 1, after ministering to many people after sunset, Jesus still gets up before daybreak, presumably because it's like the only way that he can get time on his own to pray. And having time alone to recharge after ministering is something that he taught the disciples as well. In Mark 6, they return from being sent out to all the surrounding areas, and they're so busy that we're told they're not even getting time to eat. So Jesus encourages them to join him in getting away to a quiet place to rest. And then there's many other examples, even including the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus goes to pray alone before he's arrested, and all the terrible events of Easter week. So in the same way that God gives us a day a week to rest from activity from the other 6, to spend time just relaxing with each other and with him, we see Jesus continually balancing the activity, the noise, if you like, with rest, prayer, and solitude. And we have a biological daily rhythm as well. The very fact that we need to sleep shows that we're not built for conscious processing of information continually. And the problem these days is we're processing so much when we are awake that we can't get to sleep. Our mind is actually struggling just to catch up. And if we think about TV and social media content, it's deliberately very intense because that keeps our attention. It's much more intense than real life. In fact, who knows anyone who has as much drama in their life as the average character in a soap opera? I mean, can you even imagine? Or if you like watch a thriller before bedtime, and then you're trying to get to sleep and your body is pumped full of adrenaline. And what if we're just not built to cope with the level of stimulation and bad news that is so easily available? A study of teenagers last year showed that the 15 to 19% who had symptoms of smartphone addiction were roughly twice as likely to be anxious and depressed as their peers. And Channel 4's documentary Swiped took phones away from 11-year-olds for 3 weeks. Some of them were already showing a reduction in grey matter in their brains. They're 11 and their brains are shrinking. Mental health issues reduced by 17%, and they were sleeping an extra hour per night, even after just 3 weeks of digital detox. And that digital diet that's served up by social media and entertainment, it's just so rich. Maybe it's just too rich to consume for 5 hours a day, which is now the average smartphone use for all of us in the UK. So is silence and solitude the antidote that we need? Psalm 46 is set in an intense time. We don't know the exact historical context, but it alludes to upheaval and the nations in chaos, a bit like now, really. And verse 10 is one of the most famous in the whole Bible. Be still and know that I am God. Still is the Hebrew word rapha. It's a very rich word. It also encompasses meanings like wait, relax, respite, abandon, cease, let go, release, be weak and fall limp. There's the idea of surrender, of giving up all of our stuff, all of our noise, all of our activity. Be still and know. It's more literally translated, be still in order to know that I am God. And the word know, yada, is an intimate knowing. It's like when Adam knew Eve and had a son. So we surrender the noise to become intimately acquainted with the true signal, God himself. But there's more than cultural overload and digital addiction stopping us from practicing silence. Richard Foster says in his classic book, Celebration of Discipline, which I bought decades ago and didn't quite have the discipline to read. But fortunately, I put it on my bookshelf for just a time as this. He says, one reason we can hardly bear to remain silent is that it makes us feel so helpless. We are so accustomed to relying upon words to manage and control others. If we are silent, who will take control? God will take control. But we will never let him take control until we trust him. Silence is intimately related to trust. So we have to surrender not only our noise and a little of our time, but also our control. We cannot control God. In fact, we don't need to, because his love is more even than our self-love. There's nothing to defend in his presence. We surrender ourselves and our hopes and our worries and our struggles to the one who wants the very best for his children. And prayer doesn't even have to involve words. We just enter a place where we can just be with God, and that's enough, like two lovers content to be together in silence. We let God have the agenda to do the work on us that he wants to do in the silence, and we trust that whatever he does is what needs to be done. William Shannon writes in Silence on Fire, wordless prayer is not an effort to get anywhere, for we are already there, i.e. in God's presence. It's just that we're not sufficiently conscious of our being there. Now, it may take quite a lot of practice to calm the noise in our head enough to start to become conscious of God's presence. At first, we are going to be distracted by 100 random thoughts. But even what we may think of as hopeless efforts towards stillness still have value. We've set foot upon the path to recapturing our inner space, our very selves, in all their distracted and fractured glory, and sharing them with our Heavenly Father. Now, there are some practical things that we can do to help us on our journey into solitude and silence. Firstly, we can try and actually reduce the general level of noise in our everyday lives so that we're not quite so far away from calm when we actually start. So here are some suggestions. Try to get out of the habit of filling every pause, especially with a glance at your phone. Turn off as many notifications as you can so the temptation to investigate them goes away. I found that an absolute game changer for Facebook. I use it when I want to use it now, not when it tells me someone's waiting for me to look at what's happened. Take time to just enjoy some slow moments in your day, sipping a nice cup of coffee while doing precisely nothing. Walking when you might just normally take the car to save time. Eating your lunch slowly and just savouring every bite, and so on. Diarise some time to relax if that's what it takes. Make sure that you spend quality time with your significant relationships. And then we need to work out what is going to work for each of us in terms of a time and a place where we can actually be alone and quiet. It may involve getting up before everyone else, or wait until they've gone to bed. You may have a prayer chair that's your special place, or maybe like a bench on a walk where not many people go past. You might need to request no interruptions from other people in the house or exclusive use of a room for a short while. You'll know what will work for you and yours. I have a few tips, and I'll send these out to the home church groups for our meetings this week, and I'm happy to text them to anyone that wants to have a go. But first, sit or lie down with your arms and legs uncrossed and relax and just enter silence. You might close your eyes, or you might actually prefer to have a focus, like a candle. Some people like that. Regulate your breathing. Deep, slow breaths. In for 4. Out for 4. Because everything's linked. The physical, the emotional, the spiritual. Choose a short phrase to start and then to recenter yourself after your thoughts stray, which they obviously will. Like something like, I am here, or come Holy Spirit. Turn off self-criticism. Don't think in terms of what I get out of this, or, oh, I'm just rubbish at this, because we all will be at first, but just trust the process and trust God. And lastly, start small. Aim for maybe 10 minutes as a first goal, and don't worry if you manage 5 or even 2. It's still 2 minutes than you've done otherwise, isn't it? Now, I've been doing some meditative stuff on and off since 2020, so I haven't found this concept alien, but I do still find it really tricky to focus. But even with my first efforts, I found that things just pop into my head, and so I assume that those are the things that I need to pray about. And so I pray a bit, and then I just resume listening again in stillness. And sometimes there's no need to even consciously pray at all. I can just be in God's presence and trust that He'll do what needs to be done in me. And I've actually found it makes prayer more enjoyable, because it's not about me having to think about what to say, come up with the words. It's much more relaxed. It's like spending time with a good friend. I read a book called Invitation to Solitude and Silence, Experiencing God's Transforming Presence by Ruth Haley Barton, which I'll send that title around too, in case you want to read it. It's very accessible, and it's got lots of really different practices to try when you want a bit of structure to your silent time, which I find I absolutely need. Anyway, I have made a noise, I think, for long enough, so let's take some time to respond to whatever God is stirring in us as we sing our final song.